Honourable Chris Tremaine.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I welcome you back to Parliament and wish you an excellent year. Mr Speaker, over the summer I had the opportunity to read Steve Jobs' biography. As you'll be aware, Steve Jobs was one of the founders of the Apple company. An amazing individual who, through sheer determination, stubbornness, some would call pig-headedness, even probably a meanness of spirit, Steve Jobs changed the way that computing is done around the globe and throughout the world. One of the most memorable quotes from the book came towards the end when he was asked about his opinion of President Obama's first term in office. And Steve said that he felt he'd shown poor leadership because he had not pissed enough people off. An interesting analogy. It was insightful because there was no doubt that Steve Jobs had pissed plenty of people off in his life in terms of the way that he had approached things over time.
I understand what the member is doing, and the quotation was perhaps all right, but the member should stop there. I think we've got a better sense of decorum about the words we might use in the House.
Well, it certainly annoyed many people, Mr Speaker, but it was the quote that was in the book, and I wanted to describe what he had to do to achieve the likes of the iMac, the iPad, and things like that. Because that insightful leadership, it was about challenging the status quo. And in fact, that's what I wanted to acknowledge the Speaker of the House, the Honourable Lockwood Smith, who has challenged the status quo in this House and has annoyed a few people throughout that period. But he has achieved some remarkable things through the time as Speaker, and I wanted to acknowledge that. Mr Speaker, I'd also like to reflect on, I guess, the opening salvo of the government in the first week of a term of Parliament, because the Prime Minister has come back from holiday with a message for this country that he means business. His opening salvo was to reshuffle the Cabinet, and I can assure you that ministers such as myself are very clear about the expectations in Cabinet, the expectations of performance. And going around the country now, having seen or made that announcement, people around New Zealand are comfortable with that decision and were happy with that opening salvo. The second one that I wanted to reflect on was his time in Ratana, the second speech that he gave for the year, where he reminded the Ratana people of some facts that were important, because he made the point quite correctly that many politicians come to Ratana with lots of promises but few deliver. And the first point that was made was about housing. And he reminded them that actually the houses that are at the Ratana Pa were put there by a national government. And actually it was the houses at the Ratana Pa that had fallen into disrepair that were actually repaired by a national government in coalition with the Māori Party. The next thing he talked about was treaty settlements, because that is something dear to the heart of the Maori people throughout New Zealand, and reminded them that over the last 20 years since we've been having treaty settlements, there have been 59 deeds of settlement, 33 of those signed in the last 4 years, Mr Speaker. 55% of the total settlements achieved in the last 4 years. That is a fantastic achievement and something that Māori need to understand. The third thing that he focused on was aspiration and education. Aspiration and education, and the importance of education for not only all New Zealanders, but particularly the Māori and Pacific Island communities in this country. Because, Mr Speaker, we have set a goal of 98% of children attending early childhood education. 98%. We're making good progress at 95% as we speak. And secondly, we've set a goal of getting 85% of 18-year-olds getting NCA Level 2. That's the minimum qualification you need for a trade in this country, Mr Speaker. And the point I want to make to those on the pai at Ratana, because I've been there for 5 or 6 years in a row now, is we often hear the speaking and the criticism of governments, but I want to understand where those leaders, that I want to hear them making speeches about what they're going to do to encourage their people to get out and support these policies, getting their children into early childhood education, providing the aspiration to encourage their whānau to get in behind and push for NCEA Level 2 to ensure that their kids get a trade. And I don't hear enough of that sort of speaking on the pipeline. And that's what we need to hear going forward, is supporting for some of these policies so that paves the way into the future for their families going forward. Mr Speaker, the third of the opening salvos from the Prime Minister was his opening speech last Friday. And what a fantastic speech was that shaped the year ahead, the year ahead in a wonderful way. In that respect, he got to the heart of the challenges that we have ahead of us going forward, specifically in regard to the economy and jobs. He made it very clear that jobs are front and centre for this government over the next year and forward throughout this term. And in that regard, he did annoy a few of the opposition in terms of the policy around trade and apprenticeships. The announcement around 14,000 new apprenticeships over a 5-year period, an excellent initiative to start in the year, an investment of $28 million into those apprentices. That's something that I think we can be proud of and really get in behind. But also the speech framed up the other key government's wider goals, that responsibly managing the government's finances to return us to surplus by 2014-15. Something that the opposition really struggle to understand. It actually means that we've got to live within our means going forward and cut our cost to measure, and that is a key focus of this government as we move forward. The second one was building a more competitive and productive economy through our business growth agenda. And we have a huge agenda in that respect. Just in regards to the tourism portfolio, where I'm fortunate enough to be the Associate Minister, I'm looking forward to a huge year within tourism, particularly working with Tourism New Zealand as they shape their 3-year marketing plan going forward, as they build on the Hobbit and the various other initiatives that they've had, as we look at the new markets, the Chinese market that is growing hugely, and the different strategies we use there. I'm also looking forward to working with Martin Sneddon and TIA as they shape their plan for tourism businesses around the country, and as they work out how they can better fund themselves into the future without always having to go cap in hand to local government. The next part of his speech, Mr Speaker, was about supporting the rebuild of Christchurch. And if there's anything that is important to this government, and to New Zealanders for that matter, it is about how we rebuild that wonderful city, how we reshape her and use the opportunity that we have now to make her a modern, wonderful, sustainable new city. And in that regard, I'm looking forward to my new role in local government, to working closely with the Christchurch City Council and councils throughout New Zealand, Mr Speaker. I will be responsible for the second tranche of the Better Local Body reforms. And I think there are some wonderful opportunities that we can do there, because at local government and central government, we've got to reflect on who we are the servants of. And that's actually the voters out there, constituents in places like Napier, around the world, who actually depend on central and local government to provide services that are of an excellent level and which are as low cost as possible. So I'm confident that in local government around the country there are pockets of excellence. I'm keen to acknowledge those and replicate those around the country. And lastly, Mr Speaker, the Prime Minister shaped his speech by discussing how we are going to deliver better public services to New Zealanders within tight budgets. And in that regard, my own the Department of Internal Affairs has a huge workload ahead of it as it shapes up ICT leadership in this country and delivers on Result Area 10, where we are tasked with ensuring that New Zealanders can complete their transactions with government easily in a digital environment. And in that regard, we launched last year Passports Online. And just to give you a sense of the appetite of New Zealanders for online services, we've grown that from November last year to this point. We were close to 20,000 passports online, renewed online, nearly 40% of the renewed passports now being done online. That gives you a sense of the demand, when you get it right, Mr Speaker, for that level of service. So, Mr Speaker, we have a lot on our plate this year. It's going to be an exciting year, It's certainly going to be challenging and rewarding. I'm looking forward to being part of this government, this cabinet, this wonderful national government and its awesome caucus, and taking this country and helping to lead it into the future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Dr. Russell North.